Hi, good people. Welcome to In Other News, the podcast. I'm very excited to be back. For those of you that are new, hello. For those of you that are regulars, welcome back. I am, actually, for the benefit of those who are new, a little bit of backdrop. So, In Other News is an online platform that amplifies positive Black British stories. I found that in the UK, there was very little visibility of the great things that were happening within the culture. I saw that when there was anything great happening within the culture, it seemingly looked like it remained in the sports, media, and arts industry, which are all incredible spaces. I wanted to add to that story and add to that amplification by sharing stories of people who aren't famous, who are at the start of their journey, halfway through, and also in various different industries. I think Black people operate some really niche and amazing spaces in this country, separate to Black America as well, is something that I want to note. I think that Black success is often masked in like Black American success, and being Black British is a very different identity to that, just because of how we live, the nuances in our speech, all of that kind of thing. So In Other News is a space to find all of that. So whether it's stories of business owners, artists, health and wellness advocates, musicians, chefs, photographers, poets, who else? Speakers, broadcasters, presenters, friends, barbers, and everything in between. Their stories can live here. And I'm excited to just, start the new series of conversations. So if you're new, this is who we are. If you're regular, you know how the thing's set. I am, just really excited to be back to talking to people about the amazing things that's happening, especially in the last 2 years. I think Black British culture has come leaps and bounds. Like businesses are turning 7, 8, scaling up in the millions in terms of revenue growth, and it's just sensational scenes. So look forward to many more conversations, and I hope that you enjoy the first episode, which is just with me. In Other News, the podcast. For context, when I turned 26, I decided that I was going to write down my age in lessons every year. However, by the time I got to 28, I was at 32 lessons by the time 6 months has gone past. So I just decided to keep adding to notes on my phone for lessons that I'm learning and living, because I think that's also very important, that it's all well and good to learn lessons, but if we're not living them, it's just dormant. So I am going to share, 11 is one of my favourite numbers. It's also my birth date. So by virtue of that, I'm going to share 11 lessons that I've learned in the last year that I'm currently continuing to learn, relearn. So the first one actually came from a sermon I was watching, a pastor called Pastor Mike. I can't remember what sermon series it was from, but it really resonated. The reason people hold back on stuff is because they don't believe there can be more of it. And I think that speaks to everything. That speaks to people holding back on money, their resources, kindness, empathy, joy, so many things. And I think the more we realize that we have both non-infinite and also infinite resources, that we can just give more of ourselves to others in service and with a willing heart. I think obviously the first thing that came to mind when I read that was around money. And I think the narrative is, don't give more than you can afford to lose essentially. But I truly believe, as much as I feel like there's truth to that, because otherwise you'll just be doing things sporadically and not really thinking about what you're doing in terms of supporting other people financially. But I do think that if you give, especially from a financial point of view, with a willing heart and just wanting to, then it always comes back to you. And what's also important to remember that I've learned is that it doesn't always come back to you financially. It might come back to you in another way. It might come back to you in an opportunity. It might come back to you in a relationship. It might come back to you in just an internal feeling. So I think ultimately the lesson here is giving out, knowing that you gave out with a willing heart and you just wanted to, regardless of what you get back in return. The second one is work from rest and not just rest from work. So most people that I know rest from work, which is fine and which is normal and which is necessary. But I think it's also very important, and like you'll hear in an upcoming conversation, the importance of sleep and actually getting rest so you can work from an optimum point of view. And rest doesn't necessarily only mean sleep. It kind of means just putting your mind at rest. So whether you're into kind of meditation or prayer or even nothing spiritual, but just taking time out for yourself, sitting outside, being in an open space, reading a book, or just doing nothing at all. I think finding time to like put our minds at rest to be able to optimize how we work moving forward is a lesson that I've learned is so key. The sleep one, yeah, we're getting there. But in other areas, I'm feeling like, and do you know what's actually rest for me, although it sounds a bit strange? Dance. So I find that like one of the most therapeutic things that I do. And although it's obviously vigorous, there's so much going on, the music is loud, the vibes are high, it also feels like a moment of solitude, and it helps me reset. So although the lesson is don't just work from rest from work, whatever rest means for you, I think it's really important to find that, so that when you do go into work or like a difficult situation or just life in general, you can feel like you're prepared in your body to like get the job done. The third one is done is better than perfect. Striving for perfection often leads to procrastination. Focus on your ability to execute and then refine as you go along. I think this holds bare people back, myself included. Like wanting to start something so perfectly, get it so right, not make any mistakes, and then 10,000 million years later, you're saying, oh, but I wish. I think a story that I've recently heard was Tracy Ellis Ross. She's developed a hair care range called Pattern, and it took her 10 years to get right. And now, like, it's honestly one of the best ranges of products I have ever used. And it just speaks to the fact that taking your time to get something right is really important, but knowing the difference between taking your time to get it right and procrastination because you think, I've got time. As much as, yes, we all do have time, our days are, without sounding morbid, our days are actually numbered. So I think ultimately what I also know is that fear is like the foundational feeling that procrastination is built on. Like when we procrastinate on stuff, I think it's because we're a bit scared. Like we think, I don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes it actually is as simple as that. Like I don't know what's going to happen. And it might not be specific. Like I don't know what's going to happen with my money, or I don't know what's going to happen with my friendships, or I don't know what's going to happen with my reputation. It might just be, I just don't know what's going to happen. But execution is courageous. And I think if I'm talking to myself in all of these lessons, knowing how to execute and then refine is really important. Like everything we now see that we hold or view or experience in its state was once like a beta trial, was once like the first version, was once the demo. And I think had Apple not started, we wouldn't be here. Had even the space that I'm in recording the podcast at Translate Culture, had they not started the business, I wouldn't be here. So I think, the importance for me these days and my encouragement to anyone is just to execute now and then see how you can pattern up and like refine it and get it right later on. The fear of not knowing what's happening is what holds us back. So I think just, it's cliche, but just start. The next one is when you don't hear God's voice in a situation, it's not always a bad thing. A good teacher doesn't talk through a test. It's time to apply what you've learned. So that one I relate back to, if I was to make it visual, I relate back to school. So I know that I'm laughing because I remember in school, teachers walking past and kind of miming to me and other students like, are you okay? Got it. Like that. But ultimately, like, they're just encouraging you to apply what you've learned. They're not giving you the answer as they walk down the aisles. They're encouraging you to just tap into yourself and the information that you have and the skills that you have and the wisdom that you have and just apply that out. We never know if we're going to get it 100% right, but I think not doing anything is also doing something. So that for me is also got a spiritual element to it as well. Like, as a woman of faith, like, prayer is really important. But sometimes when I pray and don't hear anything back, I'm like, not sure what's going to happen now. But sometimes it's actually, like, I think in my experience that it's actually God not saying anything because he's like, you know the answer. It's in you. Like, or you've been through a similar situation like this before. It's a bit like, like transferable skills at work, where you've done something one place and then you go somewhere else and actually you can do it another place. That's what I think that situation is like. Like, it's just transferring that knowledge that you already have into a new situation and not being afraid that if you don't hear God's voice, you shouldn't do it. Sometimes it's the sign to actually do it because you've got the skill within you or you've got the answer within you. The fifth one. This is a lesson that a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine actually, Darren, shared with me. And it is, sometimes we don't do things because of the opinions of one or two, not realizing that there's 100 or 200 that will benefit. So that kind of links to the procrastination thing and the fear thing, and just ultimately feeling like just because a couple of people gave you advice or shared a viewpoint that doesn't necessarily align with how you were internally feeling, don't let that be the fuel to propel you to see if you can just it's not even a prove them wrong thing at all. I don't necessarily like subscribe to that, but I think it's more about let's just see. Like, let's just see. The people that you ask for opinions or guidance or advice from are not the only people in the world. A lot of us are impacted and influenced by things that a lot of people aren't influenced by. So naturally, like we know now in terms of like how social media is growing and the appeal of like influencer culture, we can all be influenced by something, and there is a market for everything. There is a woman on TikTok who folds towels, like, and folds linen. Like, if that is anything to go by, there's a market for everything, and people watch her. So it's very therapeutic, by the way. But like, I guess that just shows that there's just a market for everything, man. Like, the encouragement is not to be discouraged by like one or two people saying, not sure. And sometimes just not being so sensitive that you don't actually hear what they say, because that's another thing I've learned, is that we hear what we're sensitive to. So if someone doesn't say, oh, that's sick, and they say, oh, like, have you considered this? All of a sudden, they're not on our side. When actually, it's not that. They're just trying to make sure, especially if you know them and you know that they're coming from a place of love and guidance and sincerity, maybe they're just trying to make sure that you've covered all your bases. Having people around you and they tell you something that you maybe don't think is aligned with your thoughts is not necessarily a bad thing, but also shouldn't discourage you from doing what you want to do, because there's one or two people that might not love it, but there's maybe 200 people that will be obsessed. The sixth one is, how amazing is it that God puts you in situations because he has faith in you? So sometimes, like, when we get put in situations or we're in places or spaces and you think, what did I do to get here? Like, how am I supposed to navigate this situation? It's because God knows what you can handle, and he knows what you can overcome, and he knows the person that you can become off the back of it. So sometimes I think, wow, like, why would I get put through this? But like, there's obviously a bigger picture. And again, in light of an upcoming episode, we're all part of like a bigger picture and a bigger scale. So when we're put in these types of situations, there's also like, I feel like sometimes God looking down like, you've got it. God doesn't put us places to be embarrassed. Like, that's not God. Like, he puts us places to be, I need some water. He puts us places to be elevated and to be, to be our best and highest selves. So yeah, know that God has faith in you as well when he puts you certain places. Okay, number 7 is, not everything finds you. Sometimes you have to seek the things you wish to be a part of. So yeah, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. I think it's really important to not only rely on kind of life to align you with things, but also be proactive in aligning yourself with things. Me and one of my closest friends always talk about like making actual changes, like Leah. we always talk about like actually making changes for things that we don't like or things that we know we actually can change, even if it's small steps. And I think maybe that's the intimidation factor, like feeling like, oh, it's such a big task to change, or it might take me a year, or it might take me so long, or I've got to get loads of other people involved to get there. But ultimately, all of these things can be changed. So, I think it's really important not only to seek the communities we want to be a part of, but remember that, like, alignment is doesn't only go this way, it also has to go that way. The eighth one, and this was a hard one for me to accept, but the eighth one is the obstacle is the way. So the hard thing that everyone's avoiding in their own life is usually the way to the next best thing. And no one likes going through hardship of any kind, but I have found in recent experiences and just life experience in general, often the hard thing is the thing that takes us to the next level. It's a bit like when you're playing any game, innit? Like, just before you get to like the next stage, you've got to kick through loads of brick walls, dodge bear like things in the sky, in order to get to the next place. So although it's not a pleasant lesson to learn, it's something I've learned, which is, the obstacle is the way. The ninth one is evolution comes from refinement, and refinement comes from consistency, and consistency comes from choosing to persevere. So like knowing that like in order to evolve and be refined and be consistent, you first have to make a choice that you're going to stay at this thing regardless. And that regardless doesn't necessarily mean no breaks in between or taking a little hiatus to rethink or re-strategize if it's like a business or something, but just knowing that you're committed to this cause, or you're committed to this thing, or you're committed to this journey regardless, and that you're going to persevere when it gets hard. It's a bit like that saying that says discipline is not what you do discipline is what you do when you don't want to do it, or something like that. And it's the idea that when you don't feel like it and you still do, that's you developing like that discipline muscle. And I feel like it's the same with perseverance. Like when you don't really want to go to the gym, but go anyway and just cycle for half an hour, that's your commitment to being consistent. Or if you don't want to do that and you just feel like, you know, it's a nice evening, let me just walk to the shop instead of driving, that's your commitment to being consistent. And also not getting pulled into like feeling like if people can't see it, nothing is happening. I think that's a major thing for our culture and time more than anything. Knowing that doing the work, and like I don't necessarily subscribe to either move in silence and then make your moves public. Like I think that just get the work done, and however that manifests, it manifests. But I think not feeling less than if your work isn't out there, but knowing that you're doing stuff. Like another good friend of mine, Tula, she said to me one time when we were talking about something else, and she said, why are you panicked when you're not passive? And that hit, because if you're doing stuff, why are you nervous that nothing's happening? You're actually making steps towards it. Like if you're walking to the train station, you wouldn't be nervous that you're not getting to the train station because you're actually going there. I guess the difference is that for a lot of the goals and dreams and aspirations that we all have, it's not as tangible as walking to the train station. But I hope the example is clear in that, like, if you are actually being proactive in moving yourself toward whatever that bigger life or like most authentic life is for yourself, don't be panicked because you're actually doing something about it. The 10th one is don't always rely on God's favor and grace in situations where I could have just been better prepared. So when I realized that, I was like, okay, I feel very seen, and I feel like that was a bit of a read. But I think there's a lot to be said for actually preparing for stuff and not just kind of leaning on favor and grace in times where you could have just like had your ducks in a row through like weight of your own control. So for example, I find it like difficult to wake up early, for example, and but I will also go to bed late. And then I'll go to bed and say, God, I pray that I wake up early. What in the what? Like, what in the actual what? And don't get me wrong, God is faithful. So there's been a number of times where I've actually also woken up early. But the reality is, go to bed earlier. Because that's what I mean about like just being better prepared and not relying on like the fact that God is so faithful and he's going to bust you regardless, when you can actually just like help yourself by doing things. That's like quite a low level example, but I hope the point lands in that, yeah, man, like we can all just be better prepared. And so that, like, not even so that, but we can all just be better prepared, full stop. And when God's grace and favor like shows up in our lives, it's like, oh my days, like this is 100% favor. Like I had nothing to do with this, and like this opportunity just landed in my lap, or like this situation completely turned around. So yeah, I think that one was a bit of a read for me, but it was a necessary read because I think I could do with just generally being better prepared. Like we all could, I guess. The last one is a lesson that I learned last year, is that everything costs something. So that cost varies. So naturally, it could be your time, it could be your money, it could be your resources, it could be your mental health, it could be your relationships, it could be your peace of mind. But there's nothing in this life that comes without a cost of some sort. Kind of pun intended. I think in life we just have to always be prepared to pay the price, regardless of the circumstance. So if you decide that actually I would like to be in better shape, the price of that is first of all your time, and depends on how you decide to do that, an increase in financial investment. So whether that's going to the gym, whether that's upping how you shop and what you shop, essentially there's always going to be a cost. Relationships are also a cost, whether it's time, resources, sacrifice, all of these things have a cost. And I think we could all do well. And I speak to myself in all of these lessons, in preparing ourselves to pay the price for what we want. And also knowing that when like surprises in life happen, there's also a price associated with that. So like a very real example is that the other day I needed a car service. I budgeted for how much I thought it was going to be. And then a mechanic phoned and he hit me with a cost I was not expecting. What I was not expecting. However, he did say to me that after he's finished, my car's going to drive like a Ferrari. And the truth is, my car now drives like a Ferrari. It's very smooth, but I say that to say that there's like unexpected costs that come with what we expect as well. So like just always being prepared to pay the price regardless. So yeah, they are my 11 lessons that I've learned recently. I hope at least one resonates. If it does, comment, share, and like. But yeah, I'm really excited to get back to podding, talking to people and sharing their stories with you. I have been impacted by so many stories, not only in this In Other News journey, but generally in life. And I'm excited to be a vehicle to be able to inspire you guys by other people's stories as well. To follow us and keep up with everything that we're doing, we're at In Other News UK on Instagram and Twitter. The website is www.inothernews.uk, not .co.uk, just .uk, and YouTube is In Other News UK as well. My personal Instagram and Twitter is Canned Goods. That's CANDGOODS. On Instagram, it's got an underscore. On Twitter, no underscore. But yeah, on both places, you'll see everything that's going on with In Other News. But yeah, welcome to the community.